Chapter 1. When laughter became his proof of control. He said I was too serious, that I made life heavy. But the day he stood in a therapist's office crying while our daughter whispered that I used to laugh so he'd stop yelling, I realized I'd already won. My name is Laura Miller. I spent 10 years mistaking control for love laughter, for peace and silence for safety. But the moment I stopped performing his version of happiness, the truth finally spoke louder than his jokes. I used to think our house was quiet because we were happy. The kind of suburban quiet you buy with a fixed mortgage and a decent lawn service. Kirkland winters can be gentle like that. The lake still and pewter under a sky that never fully commits to blue. Inside our two-story, I moved like a person who knew where everything belonged. My sketchbooks stacked by the back door, the brushes soaking in a jam jar near the sink. Sophie's sneakers lined up with the toes all pointing one direction. Order feels like safety when you are trying not to make a scene. At school, I was Ms. Miller, who could get a room full of 7th graders to believe that negative space mattered and that a messy charcoal handprint could be a kind of truth. At home, I was Laura, who laughed on cue. It started as a compromise. Ethan would come down the stairs after a day of sprints and stand-ups and whatever other words his company used to make office life sound athletic. He would say that I took things too seriously, smile more. I knew he thought it was harmless. I decided it would be easier to give him the noise he wanted. People assume gaslighting is all fireworks. In our house, it sounded like a joke, repeated until it felt like a rule. Every time I brought up a heavy thing, he told me not to make drama. When I said I was tired, he said I was intense. When I said I wanted to plan money for the summer, he said we would figure it out and asked why I looked so grim. I learned to lift the corners of my mouth and speak in a lighter register. I learned to apologize before he had the chance to tell me I was being a lot. It is easy to confuse politeness with love when you both prefer not to fight. By spring, the studio in the backyard was my only unobserved room. After dinner, I would slide open the door and step into that air of turpentine and pine. The heat lamps made the space glow like a lantern in the grass. I taught 2 nights a week online, adults who had given up art at 20 and wanted it back at 40. We talked about edges. We talked about how shadows are never black. In the pauses, I listened to the house. I could hear Sophie humming while she brushed her teeth. I could hear Ethan laughing at something on his phone. Laughter does not always mean joy. Sometimes it means everything is fine because I say it is. In June, we planned a small birthday for Sophie. Nothing fancy. 6 girls from her class. Cupcakes with purple frosting. A rented bubble machine that made the yard look like it was snowing soap. My sister drove up from Tacoma with a tray of strawberries, and I made a banner that spelled 8 using paper cutouts from old magazines. Ethan took charge of entertainment in the way he loves to take charge. He is good with kids. I will say that. He can make a balloon dog that actually looks like a dog. He lined up the girls for a limbo and played an old pop song from his phone. When the music cut, he looked toward the patio where I stood with a trash bag and told me to smile for the camera. He said, "Do not make me look like I married a serious person." It was supposed to be funny. People laughed. I felt my face move into the expression I have practiced for years. Sophie stood at my side and did not look up at me. She pressed her shoulder into my hip. The bubble machine kept working. The camera kept recording. That night, after everyone left, I rinsed the purple icing off the knives and loaded the dishwasher and took the little memory card out of the camera. Ethan fell asleep on the couch with the television still talking low. I sat at the kitchen counter with a mug of mint tea and watched the clips. The girls running through the bubbles, the dog chasing one that popped against his nose. My sister laughing with her head thrown back. Then the moment when Ethan turned the lens on me and stuck out his hand like a conductor asking for something brighter. I could see the delay between the joke and my face catching up. My smile arrived late like a person running for a train she knew was gone. Sophie leaned closer into me and her mouth went flat. I paused the video and studied the freeze frame. There are times you recognize yourself and times you meet a stranger living behind your eyes. The next day was Sunday. We ate pancakes and cleaned the patio. Ethan posted a slideshow of the party from his phone. The caption said that our girl was 8 and unstoppable. He showed me and asked if I liked it. I told him it was sweet. He kissed the top of my head and said, "Look at that grin, you finally found it." I did not answer. He opened his laptop to check something for Monday, and I went out to the studio to sort brushes and leave him the silence he always said he needed to concentrate. He worked at a company called Cloud Vista. The name sounded like a screensaver, and that felt appropriate. He was a senior engineer who had become a lead because he could talk to managers without making them nervous. He liked to call it translation. We met when I was 26 and he was 29 at an arts fundraiser where his team had donated a small app to catalog the school's collection. He admired my lesson plan on the history of color. I admired the way he asked questions and then actually listened to the answers. I still believe there was a season when he saw me. People change. Work changes them. Fear changes them more. On Monday after school, I came home early to prep a still life unit and found the house quiet. I set my tote bag on the bench and went upstairs to put a load of laundry in before I lost the will. Ethan's office is next to the laundry room. The door was half open. I was looking for the basket when his screen caught my eye. I would not have noticed if the window had not been so bright. I stepped closer for the basket and saw a chat panel on his screen. I did not touch anything. I did not type anything. I did not take a picture. I read a line that said, "Miss your smile today," with a little heart someone had reacted with. The name at the top said Grace Hanley. I knew that name. I had met Grace during a holiday event a year ago. She was younger than us by a decade, with a quick laugh and a shy way of looking down after she said something smart. She worked on a team that shared a floor with Ethan's group. She had complimented my scarf and asked whether I sold my paintings. I remember liking her. I stood there with the hum of the dryer and the screen humming with it. It is possible to feel like you are floating and sinking at the same time. I found the hamper and walked downstairs and folded the towels in perfect squares. I waited until dinner when Sophie was making a diorama for school at the end of the table, and the dog had finally stopped clicking around on the hardwood. I told Ethan that I had seen a message while I was getting laundry. I said I did not go looking. I said I needed him to explain what "Miss Your Smile" meant. He kept stirring the pot like I had asked him to watch a sauce while I took a call. He asked me why I was snooping. I told him I was not. He said the chat was friendly and that I always read into things. He said I was building a problem where there was none. He said that if I smiled more, I would not go down rabbit holes. There are moments when compulsion to defend yourself feels like gravity. I felt it and let it pass. I told him I did not want to fight in front of Sophie. He said that was dramatic. I told him I wanted to understand our rules. He said he refused to justify a joke. I said I did not laugh. He said that was not his fault. Sophie looked up at me with glue on her fingers and said she needed help with the cardboard roof. I wiped her hands and trimmed the flap and talked about the importance of letting the glue set before you move on. That is something I knew how to do. That night I lay awake and listened to the house. Ethan took his phone into the bathroom and ran the shower for a long time without stepping in. I could hear the soft ping of a message under the noise. When he came back to bed, he put the phone face down on the nightstand and rolled over. I studied the ceiling and counted the seams in the drywall until the numbers meant nothing. My chest felt tight in a way I recognized from the moments before a school fire drill. The alarm is not sounding yet. You know it will. On Tuesday, I called my friend Megan during my planning period and asked if she could meet me for coffee after school. She teaches music and can recognize a sour note before anyone else can name it. We sat on the bench outside a place near campus, and I told her about the message and the birthday joke and how tired I was of being the person who made everything smooth. She asked whether I felt unsafe. I said no. She asked if he had ever yelled or thrown anything at me. I said no. She looked at me for a long moment and said that what I was describing was a version of control that runs quieter because it does not leave a mark you can photograph. She suggested I talk with a lawyer, not because I had to leave, but because knowledge is a form of oxygen. I told her I did not want to blow up my life. She said, then do not. Just know where the exits are. I did not call a lawyer that week. I did make a new file folder on my desktop and named it Household. I started putting small things in it, copies of bank statements, a list of recurring bills, photos of receipts from school expenses in case we needed to track who paid what. It felt like tidying a drawer. People who have lived in the shadow of someone else's moods get very good at being ready. Sophie asked to watch the birthday video on Thursday after dinner. We sat together at the kitchen counter and clicked through the clips. She laughed at the dog chasing Bubbles. She leaned into me when her own face filled the screen with frosting on her chin. The scene with Ethan pointing the camera toward me arrived, and I felt my ribs tighten for a second. She watched herself in the frame next to me and then pressed pause. She said her tummy hurt that day, but she did not want to ruin the party. I told her she never has to pretend for me. She nodded and hit play, and we let it run to the end, where the girls waved at the camera and the bubble machine sputtered and stopped. On Friday night, Ethan suggested a date night for the next week. He said we needed fun. He said we were getting heavy. He put his hand on my back and told me I was beautiful and that he loved when I laughed. I asked whether he had spoken with Grace since Monday. He pulled his hand away and said I was still obsessing. He said nothing had happened. He said that if I knew how tech people worked, I would know that teams are friendly because the work is brutal. He said the job was intense and he needed levity at home so he could do well for us. The words were smooth from practice. I did not argue. I told him we could look at next weekend and then went out to the studio. The night had turned cold in that sudden maritime way. I clicked on the lamps and watched the yellow light push the dark back a few feet. The canvas on my easel was a portrait I had not named. I had started it in April and abandoned it in May. The face was mine, but older. The mouth was straight. The eyes were kind. I mixed a small amount of ultramarine with white and let the brush drag a thin line along the edge of the jaw. The little stroke changed how the light fell across the cheek. Sometimes that is all it takes. A line shifted and the whole image tells the truth. I went back inside close to midnight. The dishwasher hummed. The dog slept with his feet twitching. Ethan had left his laptop open on the coffee table. I did not touch it. I am telling you this because people will wonder. I did not touch it. I turned off the living room lamp and walked to the stairs. At the bottom step, I stopped and looked back at the dark screen. The black window reflected a small mirror of the room. I could see the outline of my body in the reflection, and the doorway behind me, and the faint glow of the microwave clock. I thought of the way he teased me in front of our family and how easily everyone laughed. I thought of the way Sophie pressed her shoulder into me while the camera watched us. Upstairs, I washed my face and turned on the bedside lamp. I took out my journal and wrote a sentence without stopping to make it perfect. If he only believes I am fine when I am smiling, then he has never met me. I closed the book and slid it into the drawer with the spare reading glasses and the little tube of hand cream. The house creaked like an old hull on water. I stood and turned off the light. The room went dark except for the thin glow from the hallway nightlight. I lay down and waited for my eyes to adjust. Somewhere below, the television clicked and went silent. The quiet held for a few seconds, and then I heard it. Not loud, not even fresh. The sound of laughter caught on a loop from the birthday video I had left, paused on the kitchen counter. Ethan's voice in that bright party register bouncing off the tile and back again. Smile for the camera. The screen must have slipped from pause to play. I could have gone down to stop it. I did not. I lay there and listened until the sound thinned and the house remembered how to be still. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 2. The day silence sounded louder. Morning came with a pale wash of light and the smell of coffee drifting up the stairs. I moved through the motions. Lunches packed, a permission slip signed, Sophie's hair braided and smooth under my palm. Ethan scrolled his phone at the counter and told me I looked tired. He said we should do something fun soon. He said fun like a prescription. I nodded the agreeable nod that lays down a rug over a stain and calls the room clean. Traffic on Market Street stalled behind a school bus, and my mind replayed the birthday clip I had watched the night before. By the time I parked in the staff lot, the late bell was already ringing in my head. I hustled down the hall with my tote hitting my hip and slipped into my classroom as my 7th graders were unstacking stools. I opened with a breath and a smile that felt stiff, then guided them into contour studies of their hands. We drew in silence for a full minute, and I felt something unclench. Then the knock came. Mr. Davenport leaned in and said my name in the comfortable way a person uses when they expect an easy moment. He asked if I could stop by after third period. He added that it was nothing big. I nodded again. In his office, the blinds were half tilted against a gray morning. He gestured to the chair. He said he knew I had a lot on my plate and that I was one of the most reliable people on staff. He said he had to mention 2 late arrivals in a single week. He said it as gently as a person can when policy requires a note on a file. I told him it would not be a pattern. He said he believed me. He asked if I had support at home. I could have said so many things. I said yes. Back in my room, I found Sophie's sketchbook on the back counter where she had left it after visiting on Friday. She likes to stay after dismissal sometimes and color while I tidy. I flipped it open to a drawing of the three of us on a dock at the lake. The figures were simple, but the lines sure. She had given Ethan a wide smile herself, a sideways grin, and me a mouth like a straight horizon. It was not unkind. It was accurate. At home that evening, the house hummed with the usual end-of-day electricity. The dog circled his bowl. Ethan stood at the stove and announced that he was making pasta because he said it was impossible to be sad with Basil in the room. I set the table. Sophie sprinkled Parmesan and narrated her day. She said her friend Lily had lost a tooth and that Mrs. Chang had a new plant on the windowsill that looked like a small palm. Ethan asked Sophie who made her laugh the most at school. She said Ms. Antunes during music because Ms. Antunes did a silly warm-up where everyone sang the alphabet backward. Ethan laughed and said he wished we had more of that energy at home. I said, pass the salad. He said, there it is, again the serious voice. I swallowed and offered the bowl. Sophie watched us the way a child watches a candle that may go out. The next morning, our kitchen was a small airport where every flight was delayed 5 minutes. Sophie did not want the blue socks. Ethan could not find his wallet. I could not find the permission slip I had signed. A minute became 10. When I finally backed out of the driveway, Ethan called after me to remember to smile today. The words landed like a towel thrown across my shoulders. Warm, weighty, unwanted. After school, I texted Megan and asked if she could meet me near the district office. We took a table by the window at a coffee shop that smells like caramel even when no one has ordered anything sweet. Megan listened, the way musicians listen. She did not jump in. She let the measure finish before she answered. I told her about the late slips and the birthday video and the basil and how I felt like I was walking through the house carrying a fragile thing that only I could see. She asked if I felt safe. I said yes. She asked if I trusted my perception. I told her I used to. She put her elbows on the table and said a simple thing. If he makes you doubt your own weather report, talk to a lawyer. Not to storm the building, just to learn the exits. I said I did not want a divorce. She said knowing your rights is not the same as leaving. She said do it for the version of you who sleeps through the night. I drove home with her words like small pebbles in my pocket. I did not call anyone yet. I set my phone on the counter and started the rice cooker and chopped a cucumber into thin coins. When Ethan came in, he kissed my cheek and told me he had an idea. He said we should invite a few people over on Saturday. He said gatherings reset the energy. He listed names from his team and included Grace so casually that the syllables slid past before I could decide how I felt. He said he would grill. He said he wanted us to feel light again. Saturday came with a bright cold that made the backyard look honest. I made a large bowl of fruit and a smaller bowl of a dip my sister swears by. I straightened the chairs on the deck and wiped the glass table. Ethan marinated chicken and told me he was good at this. He told me hosting was easy if you just set the tone. He said he would handle the tone. I went upstairs to check on Sophie. She was placing napkins in a perfect fan on a tray. She asked who was coming. I told her the names I knew. She asked if Grace was nice. I said she seemed like a kind person. Sophie nodded and went back to the napkins. Grace arrived with a bottle of sparkling water and a small paper bag of lemon cookies. She looked younger in daylight without office clothes, sweater soft hair pulled back like she had been reading before she left her apartment. She handed Sophie the cookies and told her she had heard that purple was the favorite color and that she hoped yellow could be the runner-up. Sophie gave a small laugh. Ethan took the bottle and opened it with a joke about hydration. People filtered in, the yard filled with that safe party noise that keeps neighbors relaxed. At the grill, Ethan flipped chicken with an authority that felt performative. He said a joke about carbs and asked whether we missed the 90s when everyone ate bread without thinking. People smiled at the right volume. Grace stood near the hydrangeas and asked me about my students. I told her they are better at honesty than adults. She said she remembered an art teacher in middle school who made a shy kid feel like a person with a voice. She said she had not forgotten that teacher's name. I felt a small warmth that had nothing to do with the grill. Dinner did what dinners do. Plates emptied. Stories went in circles. The conversation loosened around the edges. Ethan stood and tapped his glass with a fork and said we should do a toast to friendship and to not taking life so seriously. He said it with a laugh and a glance that found my face. The tilt of his head asked for a reaction. I kept my breath steady. He said he missed the sound of our laughter. He let the words hang there, a string tied to a balloon only he could see. Sophie sat between us and ate a lemon cookie with slow care. She said she liked the sour and sweet together. Ethan smiled and reached to muss her hair and said that Mommy is learning to enjoy sweet again. He said it lightly. He looked at our guests like a ringmaster who expects the crowd to enjoy the trick. The table went quiet for a second that felt longer than it was. Sophie put down her cookie. She looked at Ethan and then at me. Her voice was small but not shaky. She said that Mommy laughs when Daddy lets her. The sentence fell to the table and all the air left the yard. Paper napkins fluttered as if there had been a breeze. No one moved. I felt the sound of my pulse in the bones near my ears. Grace's face shifted into something like understanding and then into something like regret. Ethan laughed once in a way that was not laughter. He reached for his glass too quickly, and his hand hit the stem, and the glass toppled and shattered on the flagstone. The sound was bright and final. The wine spread in a red bloom that looked like a photograph of an injury. Ethan said that was enough and stood so fast his chair scraped a harsh line. He told everyone it had been a long week and that the party was over. He walked inside without looking at us. The back door swung and bumped its frame and settled. I waited for the adrenaline to rise. It did not. I stood and got the broom from the garage and swept the shards into a pile. Grace knelt beside me and held the dustpan and said she was sorry. She said she had not known the office jokes could travel home and turn heavy. I said this was not her fault. I said the wine would wash off with the hose. People excused themselves with careful words. Grace touched my arm with a light press and left. Sophie sat on the bottom step of the deck with her hands in her lap. I dumped the glass into the trash and sat beside her. She leaned against me and asked if she had done something bad. I said she had told the truth. She asked if truth always made people mad. I said sometimes it does at first. Then I said we would be fine. I did not say when. Inside the house, the kitchen lights were on too bright. Ethan stood at the sink with his hands braced on the counter like a person who had surfed a wave and did not know whether he was standing on sand or water. He said he could not believe I had let that happen. He said I had embarrassed him in front of his team. He said I had turned a simple dinner into a performance about my feelings. I told him he had asked for laughter. He said he had asked for grace. The word hovered between us and we both heard it. I told him I would not argue. He said that was convenient. He said silence was a weapon. He said I was punishing him. I said I was protecting myself. He asked from what? I did not answer. He said I never answer. He walked past me and went upstairs. I turned off the extra lights and rinsed the plates and stacked them in the washer. Sophie came in with the little bag of lemon cookies and set them on the counter. She said the cookies would keep in a tin. I said we would find one. That night, I did not go to the studio. I sat at the kitchen table with the small note cards I keep for thank yous and wrote down the items that had gone missing for me over the last year. Sleep, appetite, music in the car. I wrote them without drama, just a list like a grocery list for a life. I put the cards in a drawer. I packed Sophie's lunch and added a napkin with a purple heart drawn in felt tip. I put the lemon cookies in a tin. On Monday, I set my alarm earlier and still ended up late. The house felt like a hallway where doors shut just as I reached them. In third period, Mr. Davenport appeared in my doorway again. He did not need to say anything. I told him I knew. He asked if I wanted to sit for a minute, and I said no. He said he was available. I thanked him. After school, I found Megan in the music room putting away rhythm sticks. I told her about the dinner. I told her about the sentence Sophie said. Megan closed the cabinet and leaned against it. She said that sometimes the youngest person names the room. She asked me if I had called anyone yet. I said not yet. She said she would text me the number of a friend who does family law and that I could make a consult and decide nothing beyond that. She said knowledge would quiet the air around my head. I said I would consider it. At home, I opened Sophie's lunchbox to wash it and found a folded slip of paper tucked behind the zipper. She had written in neat block letters, "Mom, you do not have to laugh if it hurts." I held the note like it was warm. I set it in my journal and closed the cover. The house was quiet in a way that felt earned. Ethan was in his office with the door closed. The dog slept under the table and snored softly. I stood at the sink and looked out at the yard. The stain from the wine had faded to a faint shadow. I imagined Rain finishing the job. Dinner was simple: rice and leftover chicken and sliced oranges. Ethan came to the table with that careful calm people wear when they have decided to be reasonable. He asked about my day. I told him small pieces. He told me about a sprint retrospective, the kind of meeting that measures what went well and what should change. He said the team agreed they needed to communicate without everything feeling weighty. He said he missed that at home. He said he did not know how we had become a place where a person had to watch every word. I said I was listening to figure out whose laughter drove the room. He set down his fork. He said, "So you are going to be quiet forever now." I said I was going to be clear. He asked what that meant. I said it meant I would no longer be the one making a joke out of my own feelings so that the table stayed comfortable. He stood and gathered plates that did not need gathering. He said he would not be made into a villain. I said, "Then do not act like one." The words surprised me with how calm they sounded. He rinsed the plates and put them in the dishwasher and walked away without slamming anything. It felt like progress, and it felt like nothing. Later, I took out the broom from the garage and went to the patio and looked for what I might have missed. In daylight, I had swept glass into a neat circle and carried it away. In the porch light, I found a few more clear triangles glittering near the edge of the deck. I knelt and picked them up one by one and set them in my palm. They were small enough to throw away and sharp enough to draw blood if you forgot they were there. I tipped my hand over the trash bin and listened to the faint clink as they fell. The sound was tiny and exact. I stood there a moment longer and let my eyes adjust. The yard was still. The table was clean. For the first time, I could see the crack we had called fun. It was not subtle anymore. It was right there in the light. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 3: When Proof Spoke Louder Than Denial. I started where it hurt least, with the things no one could argue with. I opened a new folder on my laptop and named it Winter. I copied bank statements from the last 6 months. I took screenshots of our shared credit card charges, the ones that looked like normal life, and the ones that looked like normal life stretched too thin. I downloaded utility bills and filed them by month. There is a calm that arrives when you sort facts. They do not care if you smile. At school, I carried a spiral notebook in my tote and made notes between classes. Not feelings, numbers and dates. The time I arrived and the time I left. The name of the student I called home about. The $24 I spent on extra brushes for the after-school club. In the afternoons, I checked my voicemail and saved the ones from Ethan where his voice sounded like a commercial for ease. He liked to leave quick messages about dinner or a reminder to pick up milk, and at the end he always said the same 3 words like a period. I saved them not because I needed proof of love, but because they stamped a day and could not be argued with. I waited a week before I called the number Megan sent. The name on the website was Marianne Cole. The photo showed a woman with steady eyes who looked like she had heard every story and would still let you finish yours. Her assistant offered a consult on a Tuesday afternoon. I took a personal day and told my students I would leave a still life set up for the sub. I placed a bowl and a blue bottle and a lemon on the front table and thought about how honest a lemon is. No one mistakes a lemon for something else for very long. Marianne's office was in a low building near a park in Bellevue. The windows looked out on a playground and a row of maples just starting to go summer green. She shook my hand and asked if I wanted tea. I said yes and held the warm mug like a prop that made me feel occupied. She asked me to tell her what brought me in. I told her about the jokes and the birthday video and the message to Grace and the dinner that ended in glass. I told her I felt foolish sitting in a law office without bruises or a clear villain. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands on her pad. She said we could talk about options in plain language. She said Washington has guidelines for child support and parenting plans that prioritize stability. She said I could separate finances without declaring war. She said I should pull my credit report and see what was attached to my name. She said I could remove my name from a shared card and close the card only if it would not strand him mid-month with approvals tied to his work expenses. She said to list our recurring bills and decide which ones I would pay personally and which ones would come from the joint account until we had an interim order. She said to change the beneficiary on my life insurance if he was the only one and to add a contingent for Sophie. She said to make a simple budget. She said all of this could be done before anyone even said the word divorce out loud. She said knowledge is ballast. I asked what proof looks like when the cuts are quiet. She said that judges read dates. She said they read bank statements and emails and calendars. She said they believe patterns. She said that if there were written exchanges with a coworker that blurred lines or affected the family printing them was not pettiness, it was context. She asked if I had any texts where I tried to discuss concerns and he minimized them. I said I had two. She said two is enough to describe a shape. I told her I did not want to torch our home. She said that the law was less about fire and more about fences. She asked if I felt safe. I said yes. She asked if he ever threatened to take Sophie. I said no. She nodded and slid a one-page checklist across the desk. She said, write down your accounts and their balances, list everything you own together, house, cars, retirement accounts, personal property that matters. She said, make copies of your last 3 pay stubs and last 2 tax returns. She said, start a parenting journal. Note who takes Sophie to appointments, who attends school events, who covers overnights when the other travels. Not to score points, to show a rhythm. She said if you decide to separate, a temporary parenting plan is the bridge. It creates a schedule and a simple set of rules about pickups, weekends, and holidays. It keeps the child from feeling like an extra in a play. I asked what to do about the way he uses humor when I speak. She smiled a small smile that made me feel seen. She said, write what he says in your own words, not like a transcript. The court does not need a perfect script. They need to understand a home. She said, do not record anyone without consent. Washington is a 2-party consent state. She said, voicemail that was left for you is fine. Public video is fine. Screenshots are fine. She said, stay inside the lines. Proof only works when it is clean. When I stood to leave, she said something that settled in my chest. She said, you are not required to be miserable for a child to keep their family. You are required to be steady. I nodded and walked out into the bright day. The park smelled like cut grass. Children shrieked in the good way at the slide. I sat in my car and wrote 3 things on an index card and tucked it into my wallet. Parenting plan, separate finances, replace the smile with a sentence. The next days were a series of small actions that felt like adult school. I pulled my credit report and found a store card I had forgotten existed. I closed it. I called the bank and asked to remove my name from the shared card as an authorized user and to leave the account open until further notice. I opened a checking account in just my name and set up direct deposit. I changed the passwords on my email and my cloud storage. I printed bank statements and put them in a plain manila folder. I labeled it June and felt like a person in a movie about diligence. One evening, I stood at the printer in the study and watched the pages slide out with their neat rows of numbers when Ethan walked in. He looked at the stack and then at me. His face did a quick thing where confusion becomes offense. He picked up the top page and scanned it. He held up a second page with the screenshot of a calendar I had printed. He asked what I thought I was doing. I said I was organizing our paperwork. He said it looked like I was building a case. I said I was building a binder. He said the words I knew were coming. He said I was trying to destroy our family. He said I had turned into a person who would rather catalog than communicate. He said I could have asked him about any of this. I said I had many times, and that laughing it off was not the same as answering. He said, so, this is it, you are leaving. I said no. He said, then what? I said, then, I am done pretending. He put the papers back on the printer, not quite straight. He said I made everything heavy. He said any man would find it exhausting. He said I needed to relax. I felt my body go very still, and then very clear. I said one sentence in a tone that did not belong to an argument. I said I am stopping before our daughter learns that staying quiet keeps the peace. He blinked. He said Sophie is fine. I said she is observant. He laughed the hard, short laugh that sounds like a cough. He walked out and down the hall and closed his office door. I waited until the printer finished and slid the pages into the folder. That night, after Sophie went to bed, she walked back down the stairs with a hesitant step like she was moving in a new place. She held a small flash drive between her thumb and forefinger. She asked if I could come to the table. I sat. She put the drive in front of me on the wood. Her face looked brave. She said she had made something for me at after-school care on the computer and that she wanted me to have it. I asked what it was. She said it was a folder with pictures of things and some words. She said she had taken screenshots when she saw messages pop up on the kitchen iPad because the notifications sometimes show a few lines, even when the device is locked. She said she had written down dates when she heard voices get loud. She said she did not know if this was allowed, so she asked the teacher if saving your own notes was okay, and the teacher said yes. She said she wanted to prove that I was not crazy. She used the word in a whisper like it was a bad word she had picked up by accident. I wanted to tell her I was fine. I wanted to give her back her childhood. Instead, I took the drive and closed my hand around it and said thank you. I said I was proud of her for telling me rather than hiding it. I said she did not have to do anything more. I asked if anyone had told her to do this. She said no. She said she does not like when my voice gets small after I laugh. She said kids can tell the difference between real and fake laughing. She asked if I could tell the teacher she did not do a wrong thing. I said I would. Upstairs, she fell asleep quickly with her stuffed otter under her chin. In the kitchen, I plugged the drive into my laptop. The folder was neat in a way that hurt. She had labeled each image with a date. Some were screenshots of calendar reminders that had comments. Some were notifications of chat messages from a person named Grace that were not terrible, not incriminating, but familiar in a way that had been denied. One was a photo of the birthday video paused at the frame with my late smile. 3 were notes she had typed where she recorded that Dad said to be fun and Mom said yes and then was quiet. I read them all once. I read them all again. The last file was a small document where she had written a sentence that made my throat ache. She wrote that Mom tells the truth even when she tries to be nice about it. I closed the laptop and put my head on my arms on the table and cried in a way that felt like a person finally allowed to feel one thing at a time. When I lifted my face, the house had not fallen. The lights were still on. The dog thumped his tail once like a metronome. The air was the same and different. I washed my face at the sink and then I took a picture of the note and sent it to myself so that even if the drive was lost, I would have her sentence. I tucked the drive inside the pocket of my journal and slid them both into the cabinet above the fridge where we keep the candles and the extra batteries. The next morning, I emailed Marianne and asked for a time to come in. She responded with an afternoon slot and a list of items to bring. Pay stubs, bank statements, a rough proposal for a parenting schedule that made sense for a school year and for summers. I sat at the table and penciled out a week where Sophie would sleep in the same bed on school nights and see Ethan for dinner twice and for one full weekend day. It felt kind and firm. It felt like a plan. I printed it and added it to the manila folder. At work, I told Megan I had met with Marianne and that I was moving forward with a temporary separation. She hugged me in the copy room with the door half closed and said she would pick up Sophie on the days I had the consults and sit with her at our house until I got home. She said she would tell me if my smile looked like a reflex. I laughed once and it was real enough. In the middle of the week, an email popped up at dinner time from Ethan forwarded from his work address. The subject line had the word reminder. He read it and his face tightened around the edges. He set his phone face down and cut his chicken. I did not ask. Later, when he went upstairs, I cleared the plates and wiped the counter and went out to the studio. When I came in, he was at the sink filling a glass. He said work was getting stupid. He said HR had sent a blanket message to remind everyone about boundaries and written communication. He said some people were babies and could not handle a joke. He did not look at me when he said it. I said that must be frustrating. He said it was nothing and changed the subject. The following Monday, I met Marianne again and signed the first set of filings: a petition for legal separation, a motion for temporary orders for parenting time and child support based on the state schedule, an order to maintain the status quo on essential bills until we could sort out who carried what. She explained each page and pointed where to sign. She said we were asking to keep Sophie in her school and to keep the mortgage paid while we worked. She said we were not accusing anyone of a crime. We were building lanes on a road that had too many near misses. When I left the office, the sky was a flat white. I drove to a small bakery and bought a loaf of bread because the normal act of slicing it at home felt like a thing that might help. I picked up Sophie from Megan's room and we drove home with the radio low. She asked if we were okay. I said yes. She asked if we would still have pancakes on Saturday. I said yes with blueberries. She said good and looked out the window. Ethan was in the living room when we walked in. He stood up with the stiffness of a person who has been practicing a speech. He said he saw an email from a court account and wanted to know what I was doing. I said I had filed for legal separation and temporary orders. He said I had humiliated him. He said I had involved strangers in our private life. I said I had involved a process because ours was not working. He said I had overreacted. I said that we would keep Sophie's weeks predictable and that he would have dinners and weekends, and that nothing about him as a father was being erased. He paced once across the rug and back. He said I made him feel like a monster. I said I was describing a map, not a label. He pointed at the manila folder on the counter. He asked if that was my file of grievances. I opened the folder and showed him the budget and the parenting proposal and our last 3 bank statements. I said I was done arguing about impressions. I said that this is what I mean by proof, not rage. He stared at the pages as if they might rearrange into a different word. He pushed the folder back an inch. He said there was still a way to fix this if I would stop. I said I had stopped the performance. I said I had started the plan. That night, after Sophie fell asleep, I stood at the kitchen counter with a pen and signed where Marianne had flagged. My name looked like mine. The ink was ordinary blue. There was no music and no grand moment, just the sound of the refrigerator and the small scratch of a point moving across paper. He thinks I will come back, but some goodbyes only require a signature. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you, Chapter 4, The Mirror in Our Daughter's Eyes. I picked up the keys to the rental on a clear afternoon and slid them into my pocket, like proof that a door could appear where a wall had stood. The place was a small house near the lake in Kirkland with cedar boards and a living room that faced west. I signed the move-in checklist and walked through each room with Sophie naming what would go where. She chose the bedroom with the window that caught the last light. She placed her otter on the sill and said the view looked like a picture, and then corrected herself and said it looked better than a picture because it changed. We moved in stages the way you move when you do not want to break anything else. First the essentials, then the rest. Megan drove over with boxes and stayed while we set up the kitchen. I labeled spices-lined plates in a neat row and put the lemon tin on the top shelf. When the sun dropped behind the trees, the room went gold and quiet. I felt tired and clean like after a swim. On Saturdays, Sophie and I walked to the small coffee place near Market Street. She ordered hot chocolate and I had a latte that tasted like attention. We carried our cups down to the lake. She picked up flat stones and tried to skip them. I watched the rings widen and fade. She asked if we would ever move back. I told her we were building a new plan and that plans take time. She asked if Dad would still see her on Tuesdays and alternate weekends. I said yes. She asked if the dog would ever live here too. I said we could talk about visits and that I would ask. The court set a date for a case management conference in November. Marianne told me it was more calendar than drama. She said interim orders would stay in place and that a mediation window would be set. She told me to rest where I could. I tried. I learned that rest can look like a drive with no music. It can look like doing the dishes slowly without trying to solve anyone else's feelings. Sophie started therapy on Thursdays after school. Dr. Elaine Porter's office sat on a quiet street in Seattle where the maples were giving up their green. The waiting room had a bowl of smooth stones and a shelf of picture books. On the second visit, Dr. Porter asked to meet me alone for 15 minutes. She wore a navy sweater and took notes on a small pad with a pen that made a soft sound I found comforting. She asked how I was sleeping. I said better, then laughed and said more accurate. She nodded. She asked if Sophie liked structure. I said yes. She said children do best when the adults pick a tempo and keep it. She asked if I could keep the Tuesdays and the alternating weekends steady for a while. I said yes. She said consistent drop-off and pickup builds safety. She asked if I could sit in the same place at pickup to reduce anxiety. I told her I could sit on the low stone near the door. She smiled and made a note. 2 weeks later, she emailed to invite both parents to a family reflection session. The message was clear and kind, brief with the time and the purpose. I read it twice and forwarded it to Ethan. He replied within the hour that he would be there. He said he appreciated the opportunity to show he was working on himself. He said things were getting heavy at work and that a lot of people were misreading jokes lately. I wrote back and said Thursday at 4 would be fine. On the day, I wore a simple sweater and jeans and tied my hair back. Sophie held my hand until we reached the door and then let go and walked ahead with that brave look she uses for new rooms. Ethan arrived a minute later wearing a gray jacket and a shirt I recognized from our 10th anniversary dinner. He looked neat the way people look when they want to broadcast respectful without admitting fear. He said hi and asked how the place by the lake was. I said it had good light. He nodded like that proved something. Dr. Porter greeted us and led us into a room with 2 chairs and a small sofa. She sat in a third chair, angled slightly toward the center. She explained how the session would work. She said she would ask questions and that we would listen without fixing what we heard. She said the goal was not to decide anything final today. The goal was to see. She looked at Sophie and asked how her week had been. Sophie said she did an art project with leaves and glue. She said I let her put glitter on the last leaf, and we both laughed because the glitter had traveled everywhere. Dr. Porter asked Ethan what he hoped for today. He said he hoped we could find a way to be friends for Sophie and to lower the temperature. He said he had been examining his words and that he knew he had sometimes tried to lighten what he should have held. He said he missed the sound of our family feeling easy. He spoke slowly as if each sentence had been rehearsed in a mirror. I watched his hands. They were steady and folded. She asked me what I hoped for. I said I wanted clarity. I said I wanted Sophie to feel allowed to tell the truth without carrying anyone's feelings for them. I said I wanted a home where laughter happened because it arrived, not because it was requested. I kept my voice level. We spent 10 minutes establishing facts like a map, the schedule, the homework routines, the drop-off location. Then Dr. Porter turned to Sophie and asked one question, careful and soft. She said, Sophie, what do you remember most from when you lived in the house with both your parents? Sophie looked at the floor for a moment, as if the answer might be written there. She took a breath and lifted her head. She said Dad told Mom to laugh, and Mom laughed so Dad would stop yelling. The room changed temperature. Nothing moved. I felt every sound drop away until even the clock on the wall forgot how to tick. Ethan's face lost its practiced lines. He blinked and then blinked again and pressed his lips together like a man trying to hold in water. He spoke, and his voice came out smaller than I have heard it in years. He said I did not think I was yelling. Sophie shifted on the sofa and climbed into my lap like a person choosing land. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders and kept my eyes on the rug. The fibers were looped and thick. They held. Dr. Porter did not rush to fill the quiet. She let the statement sit like a mirror set on a table between us. She looked at Ethan and asked what he heard. He swallowed. He said, I hear that I made you feel like you had to perform. He looked at Sophie, then at me, then away. His shoulders folded in. The jacket that had looked crisp now looked like a costume for a part he did not want anymore. He covered his eyes with the heel of his hand and made a sound that was not dramatic, not cinematic, just real. He cried like a person who finally believed the evidence in front of him. I stayed still. I did not lean across the space. I did not say it is okay. It had not been okay for so long that my mouth would not form the shape of those words. I put my hand on Sophie's back. She breathed slow the way we practiced before bed. Ethan lowered his hand and looked at Dr. Porter. His voice broke once and then held. He said, I thought I was keeping things light. I was scared that if we talked about the heavy stuff, I would not know how to fix it. So I tried to move us past it. I turned it into a joke. I told her to smile. I told myself it was kindness. He looked at me. I am sorry. I kept my eyes on him but did not go to him. I said one sentence. I said that is what I have been saying for 10 years. He closed his eyes. The room stayed quiet a few seconds longer, and then the sounds returned as if someone had unmuted the world. A car outside, a child laughing down the hall. The clock found its tick again. Dr. Porter nodded once slowly. She said sometimes a mirror can fix what words cannot. She wrote a note on her pad and looked up. She said we would formalize the schedule and keep the drop-off routine identical for the next 8 weeks. She said we would introduce a communication plan with a short weekly email from each parent about school and health. She said we would not include opinions in those emails, only facts. She said we would try this and review in 6 weeks. She asked if we could agree. I said yes. Ethan said yes. She suggested that we consider a short transition ritual at drop-off. A wave at the window, and then a count of 5 before anyone leaves. She said rituals make the handoff less like a tear and more like a seam. I imagined the stone near the door and Sophie counting to 5 with her fingers, and felt steadier than I had felt in months. At the end of the session, Ethan looked at Sophie. He said, "I'm going to work on this. I do not expect you to make me feel better while I do. I will see you Tuesday." Sophie nodded. She said, "Okay." We walked out past the bowl of stones. Sophie chose one and slipped it in her pocket. In the parking lot, the air smelled like rain, even though the sky was bright. Ethan stood by his car and looked at us in that awkward place where you want to hug your family and the rules have changed. He lifted his hand. He said, "See you Tuesday." Sophie lifted her hand and mirrored him. She counted quietly to 5. He got in the car and drove away. I exhaled. In December, the mediation date arrived and passed without theatrics. Marianne sat beside me with her calm pen. The mediator was a patient man with glasses that slid down his nose when he smiled. We went point by point through a draft settlement. The house would stay his for now. The mortgage would remain current. Child support would follow the state schedule with a slight deviation for after-school care. Holidays would alternate, birthdays would be shared if Sophie wanted that. I kept the lake rental through June with the option to extend. I would maintain Sophie's school enrollment and would text if a pickup ran more than 15 minutes late. The tone remained like the writing on the page, firm. "Plain," Ethan signed with a face that looked both older and younger. He did not fight to be the funniest person in the room. He just nodded when a point made sense and asked a question when he did not understand. When we finished, he looked at me for permission to speak and then said thank you to everyone at the table. He said he was grateful to have a map. Marianne shook his hand. She told me good work. On the way out, I asked the mediator where I should return my copy of the draft once we had the final version. He pointed to a gray mailbox near the elevator and said it would find its way home. After the papers came through officially in January, I bought a second-hand easel and turned the front room of the rental into a studio on weekends. Megan helped me make a simple flyer that said Art and Resilience and listed 2 sessions for women and 2 for kids. The class filled from a bulletin board at the community center and from the quiet referrals of neighbors. We painted with slow patience. We made small collages from magazines and talked about how scissors can be a way to choose. No one told anyone else to smile. People smiled anyway. On a cold morning in late February, Sophie and I hung a string with tiny clips along the window and pegged our pieces to it. She had painted a row of houses with windows lit like squares of honey. I had started a canvas with a face half in light and half in shadow. She asked why I liked halves. I told her it was not halves, but edges that interested me. She said that made sense because edges tell you where you are. That afternoon, I drove to Seattle for our final meeting with Dr. Porter. She reviewed the past month's notes. Sophie's sleep had improved. Transitions were smoother. We had kept the wave and the count. She asked if there were any setbacks we wanted to talk through. Ethan said work had stayed complicated, but that he had spoken to HR about leading with clarity, and that he was learning to send one kind email before he tried to be funny. Dr. Porter wrote that down. She asked if we could move to a less frequent schedule with check-ins as needed. We both agreed. At the end of the appointment, Dr. Porter turned to Sophie. She said, "What do you notice now when you think about your family?" Sophie thought for a moment. She said, "It is quieter, but not empty." We walked out together. In the parking lot, Ethan opened his trunk and handed Sophie a small tackle box for art supplies. He said he found it at a hardware store and liked the compartments. She lit up and climbed into my car, holding it like treasure. Ethan looked at me across the roof. He said, "Thank you for holding the line." I said, "Thank you for not pulling on it." We left at the same time and turned in opposite directions at the light. In March, the lake took on that sharpened blue it gets when the air is cold and the sun is honest. I stood in the studio one Sunday morning and listened to Sophie thump down the hall in socks. I set out 2 canvases and a jar of clean water. She brought the tackle box and clicked each latch open and shut as if to say, "This is mine in the best way." We painted quietly for a long time. The room smelled like coffee and linseed oil. Outside, a gull called once, and then everything went still. I drew a soft line along the edge of a cheek and felt the satisfaction that comes when your hand finally says what your heart meant. Sophie leaned her canvas against the wall for me to see. The houses had become a shoreline with a path that ran between water and trees. She pointed to the little dots along the path and said they were people walking but not rushing. She asked if that was boring. I told her it looked like peace. Later, we cleaned our brushes at the sink. The water ran clear, and then faintly pink, and then clear again. I heard in the background a distant echo of how our home used to be, the loud laugh track we had called normal. It did not reach us here. The quiet in this room did not ask to be earned. It simply was. There was no big laughter, only the soft sound of bristles moving across canvas, and it was enough. If this story touched you, please subscribe, and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 5. When Karma Wore My Smile. By summer, the air smelled like lake water and fresh paint. The posters for the first Art and Resilience class hung in the window of the Kirkland Art Center. The title was printed in plain black letters. Underneath it said, 8 women, 3 children, 1 open room. I turned 37 in June and celebrated by buying new brushes instead of a cake. Sophie turned 10 a week later and said that was fair because she got the balloons. On the first day of class, I stood in the wide studio with the sunlight spilling across the floorboards. The women came in slowly carrying tote bags and guarded eyes. They introduced themselves the way people do when the past is still near. A nurse from Tacoma, a florist from Redmond, a retired accountant who said she had not touched color in years. 3 children hovered by the supply table, Sophie among them, opening jars and smelling paint. I gave the same instructions I used with my students, but my voice was softer. We started with shapes, a circle for breath, a line for boundaries. The first session ended with quiet smiles and the smell of turpentine and coffee. When everyone left, I stood in the empty room and realized I was not waiting for anyone's approval. By August, we planned a small show to close the session. Megan helped me hang the canvases on the white walls and printed name cards. She said the pieces looked like a field of hearts beating at different tempos. Grace sent a package from Seattle with a letter and a donation for supplies. Her handwriting was careful. She wrote that she had spent months thinking about her part in the story she had walked into without knowing it. She said she was sorry for her laughter that night and that she was learning when silence is the right kind of support. I placed her letter in the folder with Sophie's old note that said I did not have to laugh if it hurt. The morning of the exhibition, the lake outside the windows was flat as glass. I arrived early to straighten the table with the guest book and the donation box. Sophie helped me set out small cups of lemonade. She had grown taller and her hair brushed her shoulders. She was calm in a way that reminded me of the first days after we moved when quiet had been a strange new friend. Now it was home. Guests began arriving just after 2. Some were students, some were neighbors, some faces I did not know. Megan greeted them at the door and handed out programs. The sound of soft conversation filled the space. Dr. Porter arrived near the middle of the afternoon wearing a green dress that matched the leaves outside. She hugged me and said the room felt peaceful. She walked along the wall and stopped at a painting of a woman sitting on a park bench with her hands open. She said silence became your art. I smiled and thanked her. She said she had always believed that art was another kind of therapy, only slower. Around 3, the door opened again and Sophie turned first. Ethan stood there holding a bouquet of white lilies. He wore a simple blue shirt, no jacket. He looked around, found me, and hesitated before stepping in. Sophie walked to him and he crouched to her level. They spoke quietly. She took his hand and brought him toward me. I nodded and he offered the flowers. He said they were for the teacher, not the ex-wife. I said both could accept them. He looked around the gallery and stopped at a canvas on the far wall. It was mine, the last one I had finished. Half of a woman's face smiled, the other half was quiet. Underneath I had written in small letters. I laughed until I forgot what joy was. He read it and did not speak for a long time. He asked if he could take a picture. I said yes. He turned back to the table where the donation box sat and took out an envelope. Inside was a check for $10,000 made out to the Center for the Scholarship Fund. He said it was for anyone who wanted to join but could not afford the fee. He said he had done well at work this quarter and wanted to do something right with it. He signed the donor book and handed the pen back. I glanced at the line he had written under his name. It said, "She wasn't too serious. She was surviving." I felt something in me settle like a door quietly closing. I told him thank you. He said he had learned that some mistakes cannot be repaired, only respected. Sophie slipped her arm around his waist. He asked if she could show him her piece. She led him to a painting of two hands joined over a path by the lake. He asked what it meant. She said it was walking, but not rushing. He said it was beautiful. The afternoon went on in the slow rhythm of small towns and art shows. People left kind notes in the guest book and coins in the box. When the last visitor left, Megan locked the door and started stacking cups. She said this was the kind of ending that felt like breathing. Dr. Porter waved goodbye from the sidewalk. Ethan stayed a moment longer. He asked if I needed help carrying anything to the car. I said no. He said he would see Sophie on Tuesday, and that he would keep to the same drop-off time. He said it felt good to keep his promises now. I told him it mattered. He smiled a tired but honest smile, then left. Later that night, the sky turned the color of copper. I sat on the porch with Sophie and we watched the light change on the water. The bouquet from Ethan sat in a vase between us. She asked if I forgave him. I said forgiveness is not a prize you give to someone for saying sorry. It is a door you unlock so your child does not inherit the lock. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said that sounded like something I should paint. I said maybe I already had. Inside the studio, we cleaned up the tables and wrapped the brushes. The walls felt bare without the paintings, but also lighter. Sophie picked up one of the small frames that had been part of the display and asked if we could hang something new in it. I said we could. She brought out a drawing she had made that week. Two hands held a single flower. She said it was called Start Again. We found a nail and hung it by the window. As we worked, I thought about the way Ethan had looked at the line under my painting and how his face had softened. Karma does not always arrive in anger. Sometimes it comes quietly dressed as understanding. It waits for you to stop looking for revenge and start building peace. Megan stopped by the next morning to collect the leftover supplies. She said a journalist from Seattle Weekly had called asking about the class. His name was Daniel Reeves. He was doing a feature on women who rebuilt themselves after loss. She said she gave him my number because she thought I would want to tell my story. I laughed and said maybe one more time, but only if he liked coffee and silence. She said he sounded like the type who would. Daniel called that afternoon. His voice was calm and careful. He asked if he could come by and take some photos of the studio. He arrived with a small camera and a notepad. He asked what art and resilience meant to me. I told him it meant building something with your own hands after someone told you that you were too much or not enough. He asked what success looked like now. I said it was Sophie sleeping through the night and laughter that no one requested. He asked if I still believed in love. I said yes, but it would have to be the quiet kind that knows how to listen. He wrote for a while, then asked if he could quote me. I said only if he spelled my name right. He smiled and said he would. Before he left, he asked what I would call the painting with the half smile. I said proof. He nodded and said it fit. When the article came out a month later, the headline read, "The woman who painted her silence into strength." The photo showed me in front of the canvas sunlight cutting across the room. I read it once and closed the laptop. I did not need to share it. It already belonged to the world. On the last evening of summer, Sophie and I painted together again. The windows were open and the breeze carried the smell of the lake. She asked what I would make next. I said maybe something with light. She said maybe something with us in it. I mixed a small amount of yellow into white and drew the outline of two hands touching. She took another brush and added soft pink lines where our fingers met. When we finished, we stood back and looked at it. The canvas glowed. She said we should hang it by the porch door so we could see it every day. We carried it together, her small hands and my steady ones, and lifted it onto the hook. Outside, the sky was fading to gold. The reflection in the window showed us side by side the painting behind us and the room full of color. I have learned that revenge does not always look like a fight won. Sometimes it looks like peace kept. I have learned that proof can be quiet. And that laughter, when it returns on its own, sounds like forgiveness without surrender. So if someone ever tells you that your calm is too serious, remember this. You do not owe anyone your noise to prove you are alive. Do not let anyone make you feel guilty for your peace. Proof not rage, because sometimes silence is the most beautiful answer there is.